are, one, who governs, and two, to what ends. And looking at those two questions, you need to look at power, authority, and legitimacy. But first, we'll examine power. And like the definition says, power is the ability to cause others to behave as they might not otherwise choose. The book talks about 5 different types of powers. You have formal authority, expertise, rewards, persuasion, and coercion. An example of formal authorities: a police officer. Expertise would be somebody, obviously, that's an expert in that field. They have authority with that. Rewards, many of us are familiar with. If you do something, I will give you this in return. So there's just some examples. However, you might have power, and you might have one of these 5 types of powers, but if you don't have authority, the legal power to give orders, you usually don't have legitimacy, which is the right to have, which is the acceptance of power and authority, and the right to use that. So remember, authority is going to equal power, and government leaders need to have that legitimacy, because if you don't have that legitimacy, then obviously in our government, then it's like it's a dictatorship. And we give them legitimacy typically by voting. And voting is also how we show and how we demonstrate power in our American government. The second thing we'll look at is what types of governments are there. We have typically, there's all kinds of governments throughout the world, but we're going to focus on 5, 6 of them right now. You have what's called an absolute monarchy, and there's 2 types there. There's a constitutional monarchy and absolute monarchy. Absolute monarchy, obviously, like it says, absolute monarchy. That means they're the only person in charge. A constitutional monarchy means you share the power with parliamentary or constitution, so the king is not absolute. Think of a dictatorship for that one. Democracy, there's usually 3 different types that we're going to focus on. You have representative, or what's known as indirect. You have a direct democracy, you have parliamentary, and you have a presidential democracy. For us, we have what's called an indirect democracy, which we have representatives. That's what that stands for. We're more familiar with parliamentary democracy, which we're not more familiar with, but Europe is more familiar with that. Presidential democracy, we have a little bit of that as well. And there's also indirect, which I didn't put up here. But indirect is when we have, everybody has a vote. And that was how democracy first started. Think of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Think about world history. Real long time ago, 2 years ago. And there was indirect democracy. That's a phone in the background. Sorry. The next kind of government we have is communism. And with communism, it's authoritative socialism, which is the next one down here. But communism, typically the state is more important than the individual. And so they're the ones, the state is the ones with all the power and authority. Next one we have is socialism. And socialism is what you guys hear on the news. People accuse Obama as being a socialist. So it's a dirty word in our American media because of socialized healthcare. That's why you might be That's why you might be familiar with it. Socialism is just where some of that power and the responsibility of running things is shared between the people, and it is shared between the government, the people and the government. Mainly, the government gives free things to the people. The people in return have to give up some of their rights. And one of those things that people do to get a lot of that free stuff, though, it's another dirty word in America, is they have to pay higher taxes. And so that's socialism in other parts of the world. And then you have fascism or totalitarianism. Fascism is similar to communism. There's one leader, one dictator. The main difference is there is no... Or this one is divided by racism. Typical fascism and Nazism, are those two. I apologize. But fascism, think of Italy. Nazism, think of Germany. So Nazism is racist. Fascism is all about the state as well, but a little bit more authoritative. Anarchy, that's when there's no rules, no regulations in government. Some of the responsibilities of government, what they have to give to people in order for there to be order, are laws. And another thing is what's a social contract. Hobbes and Rousseau are ones that argue for this, the benefits and the negatives of a social contract, and why we need a social contract in order to keep the people reliant upon the state and the state from not abusing the power. You also have, it's got to give some liberty and personal freedom in the governments that we know. Not all these governments here are not going to do that. These liberties and personal freedoms are given to us by our Constitution and Bill of Rights, but they were first started talking about with, and referred to as natural rights, with John Locke. I always think John Locke, natural rights and John Locke. John Locke, natural rights, John Locke. But remember, John Locke, he advocated that when the government does not do what the will of the people want, then it is the people's responsibility to overthrow that government. So that's, again, what he kind of was advocating for during the Enlightenment era, way back then. Some power and how is it distributed in government? Very, very important. Power for the citizen, voting. You show your power. People say, oh, my vote doesn't matter. No, your vote matters. Your vote is you using the power given to you by the government. So when you can vote, that's you flexing your power that people have fought and died for and continue to fight for. And so that's a very important right that you have. Now, what type of voter are you going to be? Well, that's going to be up to you. Most of America is a mindless voter. They have no idea what they're doing. They just vote a certain way because they're either registered Republican or Democrat, or they like certain things for certain ways. They don't understand the issues. They don't, research the issues. My hope is that you won't be that. But my ultimate hope is you will see the power of the vote. Okay, how is power distributed in government? These are also kind of looked at as systems of government. I'm going to start with unitary, then federal, then confederal. Hopefully this one kind of sounds familiar, and so does this one. So in a unitary system, all of them are going to have a constitution. So the Constitution gives power to other aspects of government. So in the Constitution, the most powerful in a unitary system is going to be the central government. So the Constitution gives all the power to the central government. Central government, think of that as like a federal government or a national government. Then they give power to regional governments, i.e. state governments. And then the state governments, giving them power from the central government, give power to the citizens. So it goes Constitution, central government, regional government, then citizens. You notice the Constitution isn't giving power right here. And so what I would do if I was you right now, when you're watching this very, very exciting government video, getting pumped up for class tomorrow, having a great attitude and effort, I would draw something that is going to show you this, how the power is distributed in the unitary, in a federal and confederal government, because you want to be able to distinguish between the three by drawing some sort of little chart. Next one, you have a federal government, or federal system of power. We have a constitution, and in that constitution, it gives power to the central government, which is stronger than the regional government, but it gives power to the central government. And that constitution also gives power to the regional government. So the constitution in a federal government gives power to the central government and to regional governments. Then the central government and the regional government give power to the citizens as well. A federal system of government is what type of government we have. That's the type of government we have in the United States. So this is very important. Put a star next to this. The next type is called a confederal form of government. In a confederal form of government, they had a constitution. Maybe you've heard of this before, the Confederate Army, but there's a constitution. The Constitution gave power to the states. The states, in turn, gave power to the central government, which makes no sense if you think about it, You can't have your states being more powerful than the central or federal government, and to really be successful, because then the federal government has no power. So the regional government goes to the central government, it gets power, and the citizens also get power from the regional government. So the regional government gets power to central and citizens. Next, we have, and I got to move that out of the way for now. I apologize. Next, we have what is the purpose of government? And the purpose of government, obviously, is to restore order or keep order. Not necessarily always restore, but keep order. Second thing is to socialize the young. We'll be talking a little bit more about that tomorrow. Maybe you can ask a question. All of you should write a question down. What is socialize the young? Next one is to provide public goods and services. Like, I don't know, schools, public education. How is that funded? How is that paid for? Well, usually property taxes on the local level, state level. They'll do it through sales and also income tax, not on the grand level as obviously federal level, but still. So they provide schools, libraries, and hospitals for people. Then they also add protection for people. This is another one of their purposes. Think of national defense. You also need to have coercion, which is going to be the courts and the prison system. So there's consequences. And that kind of goes back with the whole thing of order. Then you're going to have to collect revenue. That's right. You're going to need to get money somehow, some way. How do you get money? It's a bad word for a lot of people. It's called taxes. If you really want to have a great conversation tonight, when you get done with this, ask your mom and dad to tell you about taxes. Have them tell you about how much they love paying taxes. Ask you how they feel about paying taxes. And I'm sure they have an opinion. The next slide we're going to look at is what is a democracy. So now we've looked at all these different types of governments, and we looked at democracy early on when we were looking at those different types of government. We looked at the power, we looked at what governments do, and like I said, there's two types, direct and representative. And a direct democracy, we already kind of discussed it, a political system in which all or most citizens participate directly by either holding office or making policy. This could be a positive, but could be a negative, because are all citizens going to be informed, intelligently informed to make those decisions? I don't know. Probably not. Next is representative, and we have a form of representative democracy. We have a republic. We actually, in the United States, have what's called a federal republic. I'm going to ask that question tomorrow. What kind of government do we have in the United States? It's a federal republic. For those of you paying attention, you'll be able to answer that question back to me. And a representative democracy is a federal system, a political system in which leaders and representatives acquire political power by means of competitive struggle for people's vote. Think of the campaign that's going on right now between Obama and Romney. Now, there's different views of what a democracy is. You got rule of the many, and then there's also, again, it goes back to direct and representative, but you also have parliamentary democracy. Again, voters elect lawmakers, represent them in the nation's parliament. There's a prime minister and ministers. Those are the people. The prime minister is usually from the majority party, and he's the one who would be more or less kind of like our president now. Ministers, think of our people in Congress, the senators and representatives, things of that nature. Very important here, the theories of democracy, and I put this here. Those who hold all the power in government, they make public policy. Very big. Public policies, choices, government.